Alright, today is the day. Let's have the Nick Nurse conversation. What's up, everybody? It's JJ Buckets, and yeah, we are going to talk about Nick Nurse. I mean, obviously a lot of people have had their opinions on Nurse this season. I'm going to toss mine into the ring, and we're just going to have a discussion overall of some of the things that are being felt, slash the very real possibility that he may not be a part of the Toronto Raptors going forward. That being said, usual drill, like the video, helps the algorithm out a lot, and I truly appreciate it. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel as well. Plus, if you plan on doing a responsible sports betting in the near future, just make sure to check out the sponsor in the description below for a nice sign-up bonus. So for a lot of people, it seems like Nick Nurse is just not their favorite person in the world right now, at least when it comes to Raptors fans. And, you know, to some extent, I get it. To another extent, I really don't. And obviously I will talk about it from both sides here. But yeah, it does really seem, before we even get into that, that there is a real conversation and a real possibility that Nurse isn't here moving forward. It felt like a lot of stuff was left up in the air when it comes to just a non-committal approach to whether or not Nurse is going to be on this team based on just kind of like the presser that you had at the end of the year and just some of the rumors that you've heard too as well, right? Like, we have heard the Nick Nurse being linked to the Rockets stuff over the year, which is really funny because I actually think of all the fits out there, like the Rockets are not a good one. Like, based on some of the struggles that Nurse has had here with like the young guys and stuff like that, like Houston just does not seem like that team that like you idealize as a situation for Nurse. But anyways, you've seen him linked to other teams. You've seen him maybe potentially, like, I'm not saying, you know, that's 100% true or whatever the case is, but there's an aura that, you know, maybe he's starting to eye situations elsewhere, especially with his contract almost up. On top of that, obviously, you've seen the Raptors linked to potentially other coaches, right? Like, I'm sure we remember the reports about the Raptors being linked to Ime Udoka, and at the time, a lot of people thought, hey, that's weird. But then obviously as the season has gone on and we've seen some follow-up reports obviously about Nurse, and we've seen the kind of situation unfold a little bit more. Now maybe the reports make a little bit more sense, although the Udoka conversation is one that I want to have later in the video, so I'm not going to get into that just now. But yeah, like, it feels like there's at least uncertainty around Nick Nurse's future with the team. And again, if you're asking some people, they are jumping for joy right now because Nick Nurse is not that guy. And I want to be clear about the fact that two things can be true here at the same time, right? Like, I'm going to say it, and this shouldn't be a hot take, but to some people based on this season, I feel like it will feel as though it is. Nick Nurse is a good NBA head coach. He is a very good NBA head coach. But sometimes the situation just isn't right, and that is potentially what we have here if that's what you want to argue with the Raptors, right? I mean, some people will have you believing that Nick Nurse is just not a good head coach based on his performances this season, and I disagree. I just completely disagree. I think Nick Nurse is still a solid, very good NBA coach. But if your argument is that maybe he's not the right dude for the Raptors at the time right now, that I could understand a little bit more. Because Nick Nurse, he's a great coach, I think, when you have the right pieces and the right veteran leadership and you're trying to put a team over the top with coaching and you have guys that are kind of more firmly established in who they are as NBA players. Again, veterans. I think in those situations, Nick Nurse is, you could do a lot worse than Nick Nurse in those situations. Quite frankly, it'd be hard to do that much better than Nick Nurse in those situations, because I really do think he is a guy that can maximize those situations, put guys in the right situation to succeed when they know what they have to do on the NBA court, right? And obviously a lot of this stuff is going to be intangibles talk, so bear with me on it. But with the Raptors, that's not really the case of what you have in the building right now, right? Like, yeah, you have some vets in the locker room that aren't really getting playtime, or that weren't getting playtime down the stretch, like a Thad Young, for example. But mostly on this team right now, you have a fairly young team. I mean, sure, Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet are a little bit on the older side if you're looking at your core. But, you know, past that, Scotty Barnes, Precious Achiuwa, Gary Trent Jr., even OG Anunoby, still fairly young. Like, those are young guys that I don't want to say you're still figuring it out in this league. To an extent, I think they have it figured out. But even in the case of somebody like OG Anunoby, for example, based on the rumors that we've seen this offseason, maybe that's a guy that thinks, hey, I could thrive in a bigger role. And it's not a discussion today of whether or not he can or he can't, but, you know, you potentially have those feelings in that locker room, and then when you have a guy thinking like that and he's maybe put into a role where he feels limited or confined, or you know what I mean, things become a little bit more tricky, right? And in that situation, like, on top of that, like, you also have, you know, young guys that you could argue with the right development would be, you know, quality players in the NBA. I know a lot of Raptors fans are Malachi truthers. They believe that, you know, given the right minutes, given the right time and opportunity to develop, you know, he could actually be something in this league. And again, I'm not here to discuss whether or not he can or he can't, although I do have my firm stance on the matter. But it really seems like that is a situation that people point to when they talk about the fact that, you know, Nick Nurse is not good at dealing with these young guys. He's not good at getting the most out of them, at putting them in a position, to succeed and moving forward become a better NBA level player. That's a conversation I understand at least a little bit more. I don't know if I'm wholeheartedly as invested into it as, you know, other people are, but I can at least understand based on some results of looking at it and just being like, you know what? Yeah, maybe you're not maximizing what you can get out of these guys. And quite frankly, the other things that obviously need to be discussed when, you know, you're talking about things not being maximized, stuff like that. Obviously, the offensive roles are a little confusing. Like, the tactics this year specifically have felt a little more spotty, right? Like, it has seemed like there have been moments where the Raptors found something that worked offensively, and I'm even just thinking directly back to the play-in game, right? Where you have, you know, certain screens, certain play designs and stuff like that that are just killing the other team, and your offense is working and humming. And then just for whatever reason, you go away from it and you decide that, nah man, that ain't it. That ain't it. But why though? It was killing the other team the entire game. They didn't really make that great of an effort to adjust to it, and you just kind of willingly went away from it instead of going with what you knew was working. You get the idea, right? Like, tactically, I feel like there have been a little bit more question marks this season, which I don't really feel like has been the case with Nick Nurse a lot in previous seasons. In previous seasons, I would 100% argue, like, as far as tactics, adjustments, etc., Nick Nurse has been one of the best coaches in the NBA. This season, a little bit more debatable, right? But that brings me to the end, like, sorry, before I jump to the other side of things here. Yeah, like, those are just, I feel like, some of the conversations we've heard in terms of just the things that fans are really just not vibing with, let's put it that way, in terms of Nick Nurse this season. But that brings us to the other side of things, and there's a few good questions that I want to ask if, you know, the idea here is to remove Nick Nurse. First of all, I mean, Tampa season, I really consider an outlier, but are you gonna turn away from this guy and what I would really consider his first truly underwhelming performance as a head coach? Because he's been a mainstay here for a really long time, right? Obviously, he's the coach that, you know, was the championship winning coach for the Raptors, and I don't want that to be, you know, the thing that supposedly holds more weight than it should, but I do think it should matter, at least to some extent. And he's given you a fairly good team year in and year out in terms of the coaching. So do you turn your back on the guy for the, you know, first real year where it's felt like, you know what, maybe he hasn't done that good of a job this year? That would be the first thing I ask. And then the second thing that I ask is, who are you replacing him with if you are moving away from Nick Nurse? Because that's the real conversation here. And this is where I tied the Ime Udoka rumors back into it. Is that really your dude? Like, do you really look at Ime and confidently, without doubt, say, yes, he's going to 100% do a better job than Nick Nurse? And this is not even getting into the obvious problems of Ime Udoka and the stuff that he got into when he was with the Celtics. Are you really ready to invite that into your organization, into your locker room? Are you confident that that has changed and that those will no longer be problems? I mean, past that, like, what other candidates are out there, right? Like, who are the candidates that you're so enamored with that you're looking at Nick Nurse and saying, you know what, like, this guy could 100% outdo it. Like, outdo Nick Nurse in every regard. Maybe not every regard, but he can outdo Nick Nurse in coaching this team. Are you looking internally at a guy like Adrian Griffin? Is that the conversation that you want to have, whether or not you want to give the reins to him and see if he can do the job better than Nick Nurse? But just, and that's a question I'm going to leave up to, obviously, the comment section here, is who are you replacing Nick Nurse with? Who is your obvious candidate? If you are somebody that is advocating for Nurse to be gone, you're advocating for somebody else to come in. So who is that guy you want coming in that you are confident in that is going to do a better job than Nick Nurse? Comment that below 100%, because for me, more or less, I think that's going to be it for the video, because quite frankly, I think to me that's the biggest point, is who's your replacement? Because if you're talking about getting rid of Nick Nurse, I would love to hear who is going to be that guy that takes this team in a better direction than him. So, like I said, comment it below in the comments. Comment it below in the comments. That sounds weird. Drop it in the comments. Other than that, folks, that's pretty much going to be more or less the end of this video. If you're still watching, thank you. Hit that like button as well. I'd like to think you enjoyed it if you're still here with me. Subscribe to the channel as well if you're new here. And other than that, folks, it's been JJ Buckets. It's been real, and I will see everybody next time.